I'm Jim Brown, your Bible teacher at Grace and Truth Ministries. As the little girl said in the movie, I'm back. I've been out for a couple of weeks because we've had several people here that at Grace and Truth, particularly our camera crew, has had the COVID-19 virus. And Mike's had it. Mike runs the board back there. And Mike had to get 2 negative tests to show that he didn't have it, and he got those. And Mike's been taking care of running some of my past DVDs. We've been taping for 32 years, and we've got over 4,000 master DVDs, and people are not going to get all the information on those if we keep running them for the next 50 years, because the amount of information is overwhelming. But the guys are all well. Mike and Tim had it, and I believe young Chris, you had it, didn't you? Did you? You had it, and Sheldon had it. He runs camera, and Teresa had the COVID, and so did her husband Jesse. It's been tough around here. That's why we had to take off for several weeks till they got over it. And so anyway, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start, I'm going to read I'm behind on reading my emails. So I'm going to read a couple of pages of them, and then I'll go into the message. But these are people that write to us from around the country and around the world. I got an email from David Jordan in Arizona. I'm going to try to catch up with these as quick as I can. And David says, I would like to share something with you that happened last week. Hope you don't mind. I was talking with my mom and aunt about predestination and Christmas being pagan. My aunt immediately got upset, but all I did was give her scripture. She responded saying that she has spent her entire life in church before I was even born, and that while she was going to church, I was busy running around getting white supremacy ink most of my life, and that I was the only one out of 3 of us that has been to state prison. Well, it's easier for an inmate in prison to hear truth than it is for a Baptist deacon. Baptist deacons got their mindset. She is right. I did get awful ink on my body and spent 5 years in Arizona State Prison. I believe God can forgive people like David, who committed adultery and murder, and people like the Apostle Paul, who killed Christians and slaughtered the church before God struck him down on the road to Damascus. He was a killer of Christians, and God forgave him. I have to admit, I did start to get argumentative and even upset a little. Then I realized that I am guilty of arguing with God by getting upset. I told her that I should not have gotten upset and went home. Talk about feeling crushed by the hand of God. Don't argue with somebody if they can't understand the truth and hear it. God made them that way. I felt so convicted for being upset. Then the next day I was listening to Pastor Jim on one of his old teachings on limited atonement. And he said, don't argue with people about truth, that God has them right where he wants them, and that's true. In unbelief, and it is not up to us to convince anybody of anything. You can't get a goat to become a sheep. It's kind of like going out in your yard and you got a rock that's just in the way, and you just tell the rock you want it to be a tree. You can't do that either, and you can't convince a goat to become a sheep. Just give them truth, and if they don't want it, leave them alone. That's it. On a different subject, I mentioned to you the problem I have with our pastor. He does not like what I believe one bit. Leave. That's my answer. You're not going to change him. And he is one who is supposed to be performing our wedding. Don't let him do it. Our wedding ceremony at the church. Last week I wore my Predestination church shirt that says on the front, Predestination. And below it says, it is what it is. I got one that's just like that. And on the back it says, limited atonement. And below it says, it is what it is. That's right. Just because you don't like something doesn't mean you can change it. At the end of the service, the pastor avoids me. Not that I seek his approval. I wouldn't be in that church not 5 seconds. I'd say, excuse me, I got to go. But my fiance said the pastor was looking at my shirt when walking back from the restroom. I have this other shirt that I wear that says, hypocrisy of crackers and grape juice. On the front and the back says, bread body is the church. Drink of a cup, death to self. No one at the church inquires about the shirt. They just laugh and say that I must not be a true believer. No, they're not believers at all. My fiance is worried that my church will get us kicked out. Good, I hope it does. If they can't handle the truth, you don't need to be there. Before they kick you out, leave. I am not concerned, as I know God has declared the end from the beginning, agape in Christ Jesus. David Jordan in Arizona. You're doing one thing wrong. Staying. Get out of there. A preacher hates the truth and you want to sit there and rub his nose in it. Leave him alone. After the second admonition, reject them. And each one of your churches is an admonition. We love you, David. Keep taking a stand for the truth. And then Blake Bailey writes from Georgia. Hey, Pastor Jim. Hey, Blake. Thanks for continuing to send DVDs. I honestly believe your DVDs are the only bit of truth here in Cobb County, Georgia. They probably are. I passed a church the other day and saw a sign in front that says, choose God. Well, you can't. There's none that seeketh after God. I put one of your early Predestination DVDs in their mailbox. Good for you. Hope they're ready. I'll let you go. Thanks for leading the sheep and helping us to endure the end. To the end. Agape. Blake Bailey in Georgia. We love you, Blake. You're doing what's right except staying. Leave. Don't wait till they kick you out. Just, if I had to come into a church and listen to that, right in the middle of the message, I'd stand up and say, I don't know about the rest of you people. I'm not going to listen to this garbage, this trash he's preaching, and I'd walk out on him. All right. Janice in Missouri. Hello, Jim and Mary. Hey, Janice. Hope this message finds you both well. I don't believe God intended for there to be Christian denominations. Me either. Let me give you the word denomination, okay? Denomination comes from two words. Actually, a prefix, D, and nomos. Nomos is the word denomination. Nomos is the Greek word law. Law. D means to set off a law. And when you have a denomination, you got all these beliefs inside the walls of the denomination. And if you go against one of their beliefs, if you're in a Baptist church and you go against pre-trib rapture, they say that when the tribulation starts, the rapture is going to take place, and the church is going to be taken out of there, and then there'll be 7 years, and then there'll be an end. That makes Jesus coming back 1, 2, 3 times at his birth, and 4 times as God. He's not going to come back like that. The Bible says, behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. That's the time factor. Last trump. All you got to do is show some trumpet sounding at the very end of time. Last is the word eschatos, E-S-C-H-A-T-O-S. It means the last in a series after which no other trumpet will sound. You have 7 trumpets in Revelation 8, 9, and 10. And in 10 and 7, the 7th trumpet sounds. That's the last in a series. And several things happen. Christ has got 1 foot on the land, 1 foot on the land, another on the sea, and he pronounces the words, this is at the sounding of the 7th or the last trump, and he pronounces these words, time is no more. If time is no more at the last trump, how could there be 7 years of time and 1,000-year reign? It's not there. Bible doesn't even teach that. That was brought to America by a man named J.N. Darby in the mid-1830s, about 1836, somewhere in that neighborhood. And he said a young girl named Marie MacDonald stood up in one of his meetings in England and said, I've had a vision that we'll be taken out of here at the last trump. Now, she said, we'll be taken out of here before the trumpet starts sounding at the beginning of the tribulation. He got that doctrine from Marie MacDonald, and he brought it to America, and C.I. Scofield, that put out the Scofield Bible, got a hold of it. He's the guy that propagated it more than anybody else. And when I was a kid, I wanted a Scofield Bible because my father would say, you need to get a Scofield Bible. If you got one, don't believe any of his notes, because I've studied his Bible. I've even got one at home. Somebody gave me one years ago. All right. Now, besides that, Matthew 24:29 says, after the tribulation of those days, the Lord shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet. We know the last one hadn't sounded yet, and this is after the tribulation. So, and I've got Joshua marched around Jericho 7 times, 7 priests. They all had 7 trumpets. And at the 7th time around, they sounded their trumpets, and the walls immediately fell, and destruction came. It's that the destruction comes at the sounding of the 7th trump. Now, that's enough said there. Denomination. He's talking about denomination. Presbyterians said it was okay to have same-sex marriage. The Presbyterians today are knuckleheads. Same-sex marriage, they've got them in the Presbyterian church and the Episcopalian church. I want to ask them a question. If a man desire the office of a bishop, let him be a one-woman man. Now, how can a woman be a one-woman man? It's insane. I knew this was wrong, but it took me almost a year to pull out of that church because I had many good friends there. A perfect example of putting self before God. You got to turn away from your friends. They're not your friends if they don't believe the truth. They are your acquaintances. You'll hear me say that from time to time. I used to have an acquaintance. I don't say friend. I was acquainted with her. When I left that church, I did speak with a pastor and discuss the reason. I did not let anyone else in the church know that I was leaving or why. Another example of self, because I did not want them to judge or dislike me. I got over those issues, and well, don't worry, your pastor will tell them that. Now I like to share truth and don't care if they get angry. Good. You can't care whether people get angry or not, because the elect will receive it gladly, and the vessels of wrath will hate the truth. That's the way it is. Maybe I will make them think and research the Bible instead of blindly following what is said from the pulpit. Denominations are man-made. You're exactly right. If you go outside of that denomination of the Baptists, that's just one of the things. If you tell them baptism is blood and it's not H2O, and that H2O baptism was a proselyte Pharisee baptism, they're going to really get mad at you. He goes on to say, denominations are man-made. As people went to church, they attend to fit their beliefs. That's exactly what the Pharisees did. Regardless of these beliefs are biblical or not. That is one of the reasons why people go from church to church. You're exactly right. You're getting hold of the true picture. People should conform to the truth instead of searching for a church that conforms to them. That's exactly right. You're preaching a message here I may not have to preach after a bit. Of course, some people are going from church to church to find the truth and cannot, so they research Scripture and study their own, seeking a pastor who teaches truth, which is almost impossible to find. Amen to that. I feel very blessed to finally have found you, Pastor Jim, and Grace and Truth Ministries. I knew the minute I heard your teaching that you know and share the truth. It made me cry like a baby after I listened for the first time. My tears were both from joy and also sorrow and anger from all the incorrect teachings I had been taught throughout my life. Very blessed to have found you and your ministry, Pastor Jim. Thank you for all you do. Janice in Missouri. Send us a picture of you, Janice. We want to know what you look like. I got a picture from dear lady up in, I think she's in Oklahoma. This is Terry Jones. I told her to send us a picture, and she did. This is a picture of her. We love you, Terry. She's a dear, sweet lady, and she tithes to the ministry every month. We love you. And so Janice sent us a picture, and we'll put it in our collection. I want to get a bigger bulletin board back there in the back so I can put all these pictures on that. All right. Michael Hayward writes, Hi, Pastor Jim. When you look up the meaning of the word in the Greek or Hebrew dictionary, how do you know which meaning is correct? Such as the word mark in Revelation. I'm going to talk about that today. What I want you to do is pay real close attention. In Strong's, meaning a scratching or an etching. It has much more meaning than that. There's so much depth to the Greek language. We have length and width to the English. That's just about it. They had depth to their language. You say it's another meaning listed there, so how do you know which is correct? Thank you, sir. A lot of times, all those definitions blend together. You got to look at them in a broad understanding. We love you, Michael. I'm going to talk about Mark of the Beast today. Then Michael in Las Vegas writes to us, There's something I would like you to explain to me. Please give Tom your book titles on Bible numbers. I'll do the best I can, Michael. And he can email me. How did the cup of blessing come to be falsely called the Holy Grail? That was brought in during the Arthurian legend, which is thinly veiled demons or thinly veiled false gods. You can look up Arthurian legend in the Hastings that I've got over here. I got a copy of Hastings here and a copy at home. I got McClintock and Strong here and McClintock and Strong at home. The Holy Grail was brought in to the church by pagans it's always got gold and silver and diamonds and rubies, and that's not what Jesus drank out of. My research says it says from King Arthur mythology. Well, you say it right here. Books that explain it are from Ritual to Romance and the Golden Bough. There's 23 volumes to the Golden Bough. I've got that in my library. The Golden Bough was the mistletoe. It was supposed to tie heaven and earth together. Grail is not scripture. You're exactly right. Also, please explain again the pagan origins of history of birth, the eternal flame, and what I believe is related to the eternal flame. Gosh, that's a long explanation. It's nearly it's a lesson in itself. How did the eternal flame come about? Well, the fire worship is what got Israel in trouble. And that was Baal in the grove. Baal was the sun god, and he was represented by the fire on earth, by the fire. And then Grove was the tree goddess. Have you noticed wood gives flame to the fire? And the grove was the Asherah. And she was represented by the moon or by a tree. And that was Venus. Next time you see a Christmas tree, just walk up and say, "Hey, Venus, how you doing today?" That'd be fine to do that. Well, Israel, this is Israel, something shaped, something like that. There's Jerusalem here in southern Judah, and south of Jerusalem was the valley of Tophet. It actually ran across, all the way across, and the valley of Tophet, over here in Tophet is where Israel would go and off their children in the fire. And that fire never went out. It was perennial. It was an eternal fire. Eternal fire. And Israel got their fire worship from up here in Tyre and Sidon. When you said Tyre or Sidon, you were saying the same thing. There were two places that were identified with the fire worship, that kept the fire worship going. Babylon over here on the Euphrates River, Babylon here, striding the Euphrates, and it went on down. And you had the Tigris River coming down, Tigris River, and they would meet just about 100 miles north of the Persian Gulf. So Babylon implemented its system into Tyre and Sidon. And then when the Babylon carried away Israel into captivity in 586 BC. And when Cyrus came in and started ruling as a Persian king, he kept because Babylon was so magnificent, he kept his headquarters there. And what he did, he outlawed the fire worship system in Babylon, and it moved, I can't show you, it moved over here in Turkey to Upper Turkey was Pergamus. And Pergamus, if you look at Revelation, the 2nd chapter, I believe it's the 4th church, is Pergamus, and that's where Satan's seat is. And that was the headquarters of the fire worship in the book of Revelation. And then the king of Pergamos was Attalus III. 2 T's. Attalus III. When he died, because Rome over here, I'm just going to show that's the boot of Italy, because they love this system. Attalus III left part and parcel, all in his will. He left it all to Rome, and they took an Olympic torch and took it out of the temple of the serpent in Pergamos. The serpent god was in Pergamos, and they had a runner run that over, and he had to go by way of land, and they had to take some boats and brought it over to the temple of Mithra, and the people that kept these Mithraic fires burning were the predecessors to the nuns, and they were Vestal virgins. And Vestal is not a good name to name a child, even though there was a famous gospel singer by that name. And they kept these fires burning, and when John Kennedy died, being a Roman Catholic, it came to America, and there at the Capitol, they've got an eternal fire burning. It all started back here in Babylon. They kept it burning here. It was burning here. It was burning down here southeast of Jerusalem. And then it moved from there to Pergamos and then over to Rome. And it was an Olympic torch that they carried to Rome. That's where it originated. You can find a lot of that in the two Babylons. He'll tell you about that. That'll be enough. That's a lesson in itself. I usually will preach on that and talk about how the fire worship ended up at the grave of John Kennedy, since he was a Roman Catholic. That's enough said there about that. That was Michael. I'll go ahead and read the rest of his. My research says it comes from King Arthur mythology. Well, that's true. The Holy Grail does. But all of that is paganism. And it all began at Babel. Babel mothered all idolatry. Also, please explain again the pagan origin history of the eternal flame. That's what I just did. What I believe is related to the eternal flame, the Olympic torch. I just told you about that. I'm asking for any further books you can have Tom email me. I'm not pressuring you. You're not. You're always I don't mind you asking for stuff. I'll give it to you when I can. Give you the titles. You got some titles there. The Golden Bough. It's a 23-volume set. You can get the Golden Bough in one volume, but it doesn't have near the information. And there's another set. I've got 23 volumes in my library. It's called Mythology of All Races. That'll be enough of that. We love you, Michael. Keep on writing. All right. And I'll read some more of these. And I got a few YouTube comments. I'll read 2 of them. And I'll come back Saturday and read some more. From Dally Jacobson writes, concerning Revelation, eyes of the Lord upon one stone, wheel in a wheel, Babylonian chariots, 4-faced cherubim. A circle is not a sphere. Well, it can be. I know the earth is flat. And we have a firmament above us that is like glass. I thought that's when I was a kid, I thought this is the earth and this is the sky, and it's just one solid thing up there, a clear glass. If you believe in that, study the subject before you poo-hoo it. Let me tell you about people that think the earth is flat. First of all, there's at least 1 million people associated with the space program. At least 1 million. I've done some research on it. You'd have to get all these people to go into cahoots together and say, well, it was real, and nobody expose it. Nobody's willing to come out and say, we faked it. Besides that, let me tell you something about astronauts. Astronauts were jet pilots before they were astronauts. Did you know that? I used to travel in military bases when I had this show group years ago. I sat with a bunch of pilots out at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. Those guys are so proud you cannot tell them nothing. They are the top. They are so, some of them are extremely arrogant. And telling them to keep a secret, they'll say, you're crazy. They're very independent thinking men. You hadn't known any of them, have you? I have. And you can't get one of them to twist. One of them was I was sitting at a table with a bunch of pilots one time, and one of them made the statement, said, well, the United States Air Force is the greatest air group in the world. And one of them said, except for the Hebrews, the Jews. He said, well, you're right. And I've done some study on the Hebrew pilots. They are deadly in a battle. They said they didn't, in the 6-day war of 1967, from June 5th through June 10th, the Israeli Air Force got to the Egyptian airfield. It's only about 200 miles, 150 miles over. Going at 600-700 miles an hour, you're just minutes away from there. And they destroyed the entire Egyptian Air Force while they were on the ground, while the pilots were inside the hangar drinking coffee. They are really deadly. But trying to say that 1 million people associated with the space agency lied. I can't get 3 people at Grace and Truth Ministries to keep a secret, much less 1 million. Are you kidding? Anyway, Kate Bursey commented on another Jesus is Satan transformed into an angel of light, preaching false doctrine. Hello, Pastor Jim. I've listened to, I don't know who this is from. They didn't give me a name. I've listened to hundreds of your YouTube teaching classes and learned a lot about the true gospel and the false Jesus in Paul's letters having a form of godliness. I found much of your examples in this particular session related to those obvious apostate teachers like Benny Hinn, the prosperity gospel, or Kenneth Copeland, etc. However, other than why I hate charismatics and Pentecostals, I never said that. I hate the charismatic doctrine because we've had people here that are charismatics. And I hate Pentecostalism. I do not see you speak of them as the spirit of Antichrist. I don't even believe they're believers. What else would they be? As the televangelists. Now you're making a difference between, they are the televangelists. I was once involved in the Pentecostal movement and unsaved, but thankfully God pulled me out, revealed to me the true meaning of the repentant heart. I would like to write to some of my Pentecostal friends. That ain't going to help. If they're dyed in the wool, if they're not elect, you can't change them. And share with them the evidence of the deception and that they are under, but am not sure if I should. And you don't mention them in this lecture. What are you talking about? I don't have this lecture. I've got probably 150 or 200 tapes just against the Pentecostalism and the Charismatics. I wonder if you put them in the same category as the ones you do mention. I mention everybody I can. To mention all the Charismatics, you got to mention everybody in their movement, which would be hundreds. Could you please clarify as to whether you include the Pentecostal and the Charismatic movement? The Charismatic doctrine started with Pentecostalism. They're the ones that bought into it before anybody else. The tongues are a lie. Faith healing is a lie. Slain in the Spirit is idiocy. The Spirit quickeneth, makes alive. It doesn't kill and slay. I don't like anything. What about Jesse Duplantis, Kenneth Copeland, Fred Price, Joyce Myers, T.D. Jakes, Billy Graham, Charles Stanley, Jimmy Swaggart, all Baptists, all Pentecostals, and all Charismatics? I've mentioned all of them I could. I can't mention everybody in America. Let me say something that depresses me very bad. It's not a boast. I'm the only preacher that I know of in America that is trying. Notice I said trying. I'm trying to tell all the truth all the time to everybody. I don't believe in Pentecostalism at all. I don't believe in the charismatic movement. I don't believe in the Baptists and their dipping in water and their crackers and grape juice and their accept Christ and their sinner's prayer. I don't believe in any of that. I don't know who else you want me to mention. I've mentioned everybody I could. And I've got hundreds of messages against the Pentecostal and charismatic movement. And let me read one more maybe of these. This is YouTube comment. Trinity of God commented, Christmas is the reason for the disease and all other plagues. Can you tell me your thoughts on the Anunnaki? Anunnaki. The Anunnaki is a group of deities, ancient Sumerians. Sumeria was lower Mesopotamian valley where Babylon is, the mother of all idolatry. It's the Akkadians, false gods, the Assyrians, the Babylonians. It's a pantheon of descendants of An and Ki and associated with Gilgamesh, which is another name for Nimrod. I don't believe in the Anunnaki. And one more, and then I'll come back later. Mark Dumas commented on Christmas under its ancient name is the reason for disease and all other plagues. Can we celebrate Festivus? I don't celebrate any holidays, none. Festivus was December the 23rd that men have set aside as an alternative to the pressures of Christmas. I don't believe in any holidays. I believe in God's holidays, but that would be spiritual Passover, spiritual Day of Atonement, spiritual Pentecost, spiritual. It's all spiritual now. That's enough reading. I'll come back. I'll take up Saturday where I left off. Tom, if you want to know why I'm doing this, that's because I've been so far behind. Okay, Mike, I'm ready to preach. And I'm going to talk about the mark of the beast.
30 seconds.
Sailing over the earth. I don't know how people can believe in the flat earth theory. There's a lot of people that associate with Grace and Truth that do. I'm not mad at you. You're not thinking rational. You can't get 1 million people to agree to lie and not tell anybody? No way. Let me move some stuff. I'm Jim Brown, your Bible teacher at Grace and Truth Ministries. I'm glad to be back. I've been stopped by the coronavirus. We've had Mike, who runs the board back there, our camera people, have been out with it. And Tim got it really bad, and it could have killed him. I'm trying to be real careful, not be around anybody. I wear my mask everywhere. I've got a lot of past heart problems. I had heart surgery in 2001, had triple bypass surgery, and I had a heart attack with that. Some people said they don't believe in going to doctors. I will tell you this. If you wake up some morning and you feel like there's an elephant on your chest that weighs 3 tons, you're going to go to a doctor. If you don't, you're going to be dead within 48 hours. And that's the fact. You can't just live without... I don't trust doctors with all my soul and being, but there's certain things you have to go to them for, and that's one of them. And I'm trying to be as safe as I can and to stay away from this virus. I've had a history of bronchial problems. I've been an asthmatic since I was a little kid, and I've fought for breath at times, and I just don't want the virus, so I'm going to stay away from crowds and wear my mask everywhere, and that's what I do. This has nothing to do, zero to do, with Democrats and Republicans. Forget that. I told my neighbor's brother from across the street, I said, just go by one of these places and have a test and see if you got the coronavirus. He said, I'm not going to spend my money on the vaccine. I said, I'm not talking about getting a vaccine. I'm talking about getting a test to see if you got it. And they're not going to give you the vaccine after that. They're going to put you on some kind of antibiotic to get you over it. Good grief, everybody. People have got the wrong idea about what's going on. I don't want the virus. I'm going to try to do everything I can to keep from getting it. Don't mean I'm a Democrat. I don't like Democrats, and I don't like Republicans. Doctors are doctors. Politicians are something else on the other side of the universe. All right. Now, I want to try to talk to you about something here that it's been everybody's problem. Go to Revelation, the 13th chapter. I want to talk about the end of time, signs of the end of time. I don't believe it's very far away. For 40 plus years, about 50 years, I started preaching in 1962. I started studying the Bible when I was 17 years old, and that was 1956. I'm not new at this. I've spent my life in this book. I was preaching 50 years ago. What would that be? That'd be back just before 1970. I was a young preacher, about 50, from 1960. I actually started preaching in 1962. I was just a young preacher, kind of dumb, didn't know much. And I traveled with a singing group, and I preached all over the country. I started preaching on the 70 weeks of Daniel 70 weeks in around 1964. That's when I began to study it. I started hearing about it back when, back in the early 50s, my father was a Baptist preacher. We'd go to some fellowship meeting and of the Independent Baptists, and I'd hear some guy kind of take a stab at it, and it'd be all over the place. The 70 weeks of Daniel is the very key to the end of time. I've got some books over here. They're called the 70 weeks of Daniel. Let me see if I got some. Here's one, Daniel's Prophecy of the 70 Weeks. This is by Alva McLean. Very good book, but I have a tendency, I agree with him on a lot of things. And then I've got one, well, I don't have one here. I've got another one called Chronological Aspects of the Life of Christ. It's got a chapter on the 70 weeks. I believe he's a little more accurate, pinpointed than this. That was written by Harold Honer. He was a professor at Dallas Theological Seminary. I'm sure he's dead by now, but that book was put out years ago. And the 70 weeks, there's 4 things you got to look at looking at the end of time. You got to look at the judgments of God, the 4 judgments of God. The sword. Well, let me put it down here. You got to look at the sword. This is God's judgments. Sword. Famine. Pestilence. I said years ago, these are the 4 judgments for sword, famine, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And the 4th judgment, God would send these over and over again. The famine or pestilence is mentioned in the Bible about 47 times in the Old Testament, and I believe it's 3 times in the New Testament. And every time God would talk about pestilence and famine, he'd always couple it with the sword and the famine. The last judgment that God would bring upon the world was the beast. And for 510 years, Israel was a nation. 510 years, and they were a nation, and they kept going after Baal, the fire god, and Grove, the tree goddess. And then they began to adapt all the gods of all the nations around them. Let me see if I can find a map of the nations. Get over here to where the nations were around Israel. I just need an Israel map with the nations around them, because they began to adapt the gods of Syria, the gods of Moab, and Ammon. Ammon was the capital city of Jordan. That's Jordan right there. So they adapted their gods. Moab's god was Shemash. She was the same thing. Shemash is the word son in the Hebrew. Shemash comes from Shemash. That was the fire god in Moab. Moloch was northern Jordan, or the land of Ammon. Amman, Jordan is the capital of Jordan, and that was also the fire god of Jordan. And Israel adopted the gods of the Syrians, Rimmon, R-I-M-M-O-N. Rimmon was the chief fire god of Syria and Damascus there in this area here. And they adapted the gods of Tyre and Sidon, which was Baal in the Grove. Baal in the Grove. And that was Jezebel's gods. She brought it down into Israel. Jezebel's gods, her father was Ethbaal. And Ethbaal was the prince of Tyre. And when Ahab married her, she brought her gods in. They built temples for her gods. And the Levites, who were the priests of God, they took out, went into southern Israel. And southern Israel got contaminated with it when Ahab's daughter, Athaliah, you can see that on this chart, she married all because of evil association. Ahab was running around. Oh, I have to get back over here. Ahab had a bad habit. Oh, not Ahab. Jehoshaphat was a righteous man. There's Jehoshaphat there. He was a righteous man, but he was running around with Ahab, the husband of Jezebel. He would try to seduce Jehoshaphat to go fight Ben-Hadad of Syria, and he joined up with him, but later on he was rebuked by the prophet and said, "Why are you helping the ungodly?" Well, when he was running around with Ahab and Jezebel had a daughter, Athaliah, and evidently they saw each other one night, and she married Jehoram and took her mother and father's gods down to southern Judah and polluted southern Judah. That's why God carried them all away into captivity. So here's the thing that I'm trying to get at. I'm not going to tell you the whole story. I'm just going to kind of give you some outlines of these things. All right. So after 510 years as a kingdom, northern Israel split away, and God had them carried away by the Assyrians. The Assyrians, this is Assyria up here. Assyria is up here between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. That's called Georgia now, or Armenia, that's what it would be. That's where the Caucasus Mountains were. Those mountains right there, the Caucasus Mountains, that is the fathers of the Caucasian race. That's the most barbaric people that ever lived on the face of the earth. They are the ones that invented and created all this torture that the American Indian did, the scalping, burying a man up to his neck in the desert, and pouring honey on his head and put fire ants on his head. That came from our ancestors, the Caucasians. And that's Assyria up there. And they are the ones that carried northern Israel away. And it was all because of the idolatry that Israel was involved in. It was northern Israel and one of their kings, Ahab, that brought it down into Israel. People hear about Ahab and Jezebel. They don't know how evil and wicked they were. He married Jezebel, brought all those gods down to Israel, and finally they polluted southern Judah, or southern Israel, with it, and they lasted about 510 years. And it was Ahab of northern Israel that had brought it in. Ahab, I'll put it right there. Southern Judah was carried away. They were carried away in 722 BC. And this is one of the stories of the end of time that's going to come about. And then southern Judah was carried away by Babylon, by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. I'll just put Neb there, of Babylon. And he carried southern Judah away in 586 BC. And the Bible says that they will be carried away until the end of time. And this is why we need to understand the 70 weeks. What were the 70 weeks about? 70 weeks. They were about the fact that the word is not weeks. The word is Shabuah, S-H-A-B-U-A-H, which is the word sevens. And the whole purpose of the 70 weeks, because Israel, all the time they were a nation, they did not keep their sabbatical years. They had you'll find the sabbatical years found in Leviticus, the 25th chapter. God comes, Leviticus means the law of the Levites. The Levi was the third son of Jacob, Reuben, and then Simeon, and then Levi, and then Judah. Out of Levi would come the priesthood. Out of Judah would come the king. And David was the line of, Jesus was the line of Judah. David came out of Judah. That's where the king had to come from. And they did not keep their sabbatical years for 70 sets of these years. And you'll find the 70 weeks of Daniel in Daniel 9:24 through 27. And he will show you how he's measured that out. There are 6 things that Israel has to do before those 70 weeks are ended. 6 things. In fact, look over there. This is Israel's punishment. The whole idea of Israel coming back is about the end of time. They became a nation May 14th, 1948. And the Bible says when this happens, the end is going to be near. They were scattered because of their idolatry. But through all of this time period, they're going to be ruled by other nations. Through all this time period, till the end of time. They're going to be ruled by nations. That's going to be the time period of the 70 weeks. But they had 70 sets of these every 7 years, so you multiply 70 times 7, and you get 490 years. That's how much time there is in the 70 weeks of Daniel, and that's because of what Israel did while they were a nation. And you're going to find them as a nation from 1 Samuel through 2 Chronicles. The Jews call that one book. 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. That is the history of Israel as a kingdom. That's these kings right here. Starts with Saul. Let me move this over here. Starts with Saul. Of course, he was from the wrong tribe. Long story. The people kept asking for a king, so God gives them the wrong king, gives them a king from the tribe of Benjamin, the 12th son of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. So Saul's adventure for 3 chapters, from the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th chapter. He never does keep the word of the Lord like God says. So God sends Samuel the prophet down to southern Judah and says, I've chosen me a king among his sons. And he goes down there and walks before Jesse, and he brings 7 of his sons out, and he says, is there anybody else here? And he says, there's the youngest, and he keeps the sheep. And he says, I'm not leaving until you bring him in. And David walks in. God says, that's him. That's my king. So because of Solomon, God even though God's going to scatter them, he causes men to sin in order to bring about his causes. Solomon sinned. He has intentions of getting Saul off the throne. He's going to get Saul off the throne. But Solomon allows his 700 wives and 300 concubines. A concubine is a secondary wife. He allows them to have, to be there in Israel and have their gods. God says, just for that, I want to take the kingdom. What he meant when he said, I'm going to take the kingdom for you in the 11th chapter of 1 Kings. I'm going to take the inheritance away from you. And I'm going to give it to your neighbor who's better than you. So what he does, he takes Solomon, who is of the tribe of Judah, and this is Solomon's lineage here. This is the proper kings right here. It all comes out of Solomon, because they're of Judah. Now this tribe up here, this is northern Israel. Whoever can overthrow the king, if he can muster up an army to overthrow the king, he gets to become king. Most of these guys are evil, but this is northern Israel, or Ephraim. Ephraim is northern Israel. Ephraim is the second-born son of Joseph. Joseph gets the inheritance. The kingdom is ruled by Judah. David, Solomon, Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Joram, Ahaziah. Athaliah doesn't belong in that lineage. She is the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, but since Jehoshaphat was running around with Ahab, keeping bad company, and Jehoshaphat's a wonderful guy. We'll see him in heaven one day. But Ahab's wicked to the core. And some of that rubbed off on Jehoshaphat because his son Jehoram runs into the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, which is Athaliah. So she brings her gods down into southern Israel. And boy, that God says, that's it. So he starts scattering both of them. And you can read this in the books of the Kings, all about them being scattered. Most people don't have any idea why it's important to know that Israel became a nation again for the first time in May 14, 1948. That's because of their sin and God, everything that God was going to put them through. I believe that God has a remnant in Israel that's going to believe. Because why would he set these people apart and then call his church by the name of spiritual Israel? Israel comes, anybody in Israel that comes has to come by Jesus Christ. Jesus said, no man comes to the Father but by me. That's it. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the 70 weeks. I'll give you some verses on it, and then I'm going to get to the other signs. I want to get to the mark of the beast. Mark, I'm going to say something to you. Mark has the same meaning as name. But there's a depth to the Greek language that we don't understand. Let me just show you something before I get into this signs of the 70 weeks. I'll give you something to think about. Now, go over here to Revelation 13, and it's talking about the mark of the beast in Revelation 13, all through it. Revelation 13, and this is why you need to look up words. Revelation 13. It's talking about the beast. Now, I said the beast earlier was a system. When Mr. Bush mentioned New World Order, it shocked me when I heard Bush Sr. mention a new world order. I said, that has to be the beast. The beast ruled. The beast was Assyria, which was just northern Babylon. Assyria is up here. Babylon is here. This is Babylon, Assyria. There's Israel, Mediterranean Sea. Here is Greece, Rome. And Persia is what we would call Iran and Pakistan and all the stands, the Turkish stand, that was all Persia. This was Babylon right here. That's Iraq right there, where Babylon was. And this is Persia, Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan. All of that was Persia. And Persia comes in and attacks Babylon. And Babylon is on the Euphrates River. And they say, we can't be conquered. You really need these books, McClintock and Strong. You can get them on the internet. And you can look up Babylon in it. It'll tell you Babylon straddled the Euphrates River. And it was 14 miles on every side. It had like 380-foot walls above the ground, and the I got nowhere to put this up here. Hold on. The Euphrates River ran through it. Ran through it and around it. Well, how did Cyrus conquer it? Well, Mr. Herodotus, who's the father of all history, you can get Herodotus in a 2-volume set. You can order them. Wonderful set of books. He tells you, along with Isaiah 44 and 45, that Cyrus came in from Persia, or what we would call Iran, Afghanistan, so forth, and he dammed up the river up just north of Babylon, ran it out into the Arabian desert, dried up the river, and came down and walked up to the 2-leaf gates, came in and arrested Belshazzar and killed him that night. Now, but it was the Persian kings, Cyrus, Darius, Artaxerxes, that gave the decrees for Israel to come back, and less than 50,000 came back from the captivity because they were prospering over there, and they were buying houses and prospering and building up, and most of them didn't want to come back and rebuild the temple that had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar when he came in and sacked the city. Sack we use that in professional football to level a quarterback before he can throw it. Well, that's an old ancient term. It meant to level everything to the ground, burn it to the ground. Well, that's what he did when he sacked it. Now, I was going to show you something here in Revelation. All this goes together. Those that have the mark of the beast, they have his mark or his name. I didn't say that. Revelation 13 says that. Just look at Revelation 13. Revelation 13 is talking about the beast at the beginning of it. I did a series on Revelation. I did 4.5 years on the book of Revelation, and there were 236 messages on that. I did one a week, and for 4.5 years, and then I came back and did another 20 or 30 more because I didn't finish it. But you got the beast here in Revelation 13. gosh, it's hard for me to keep from wandering away and wanting to teach on this, but I'll read it. I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea. The sea is the Mediterranean Sea. That's what it's talking about. A beast rose up out of the Mediterranean Sea. Get over here to my favorite picture of the beast here. Beast rises up out of it. All of Bible teaching takes place in this area right here. That's the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. It's all in here. So he sees a beast rise up out of the sea, and we see that the beast was Assyria and Babylon, because they are basically the same system. And when one falls, the other falls. Well, Babylon, Persia, which is Iran, Afghanistan, and all the stands, that would be Persia, Greece, and Rome. You're going to find the beast mentioned specifically in Daniel, the 7th chapter, and anything. What I'm trying to do. In Revelation, the 13th chapter, you're going to find that the beast was Babylon, Persia, Greece, and then Rome. And they rose out of the sea because here's Babylon, Iraq. That's the exact shape of Iraq right there. That's Iraq, Babylon. Persia's over here. Take a lot to put Persia in there. Persia, Greece, that's where Alexander the Great, he was from Macedonia. Macedon is northern Greece. This is the Peloponnesus, looks like a hand down there. There's just a land bridge that goes over there. So Babylon was overthrown by Persia. Persia was overthrown by Greece. Greece was overthrown by Rome. And that's where they would build up. And this was the beast. Let me just read it to you right here. In Revelation, the 13th chapter, verse 1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. I'm not going to go into 7 heads and 10 horns. A head, I'll just say, a head was a capital city of an empire. Capital city. And that was the same thing as a mountain. And we're going to find that one of these heads was wounded to death. And I believe that is the outlawing of the fire worship that was founded in Babylon. It was the outlaw of that. It crept into the Roman Empire, and when it was outlawed, it was reinstituted into the Roman Catholic Church by Constantine. But let's read this. He had 7 heads and 10 horns. A horn was a power. I'm not going to go into that right now. I love teaching on it. And upon the horns 10 crowns. And upon his heads the name of blasphemy. That's upon the beast that comes up out of the sea. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear. I got a gnat bugging me up here, bugging me. And his feet as the feet of a bear, and his mouth is the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, his seat, and his great authority. Let me just go ahead and say it again. His is a bad translation. It says the beast. I might as well erase some of this. I can put it back up. I can always do that. I'll leave some of that over there. All right. The beast was like a lion, a bear, and a leopard. And the fourth beast had iron teeth. The lion represented Babylon. The reason for that is that a lion is the most regal of the animals of the Serengeti Desert. And the most regal of all the animals was the lion. And Babylon was so magnificent. It had the hanging gardens. They had put all kinds of aqueducts through Babylon so they could grow all these magnificent plants. And when you saw it from a distance, 14 miles by 14 miles by 14, you saw all this beautiful, luxurious handiwork there. Every one of the conquerors of Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, they loved Babylon so much, they kept Babylon as their head, and that's where they operated from. Now, and we know this is true when you look at Daniel, the 7th chapter. Daniel 7. Look at Daniel 7 very quick. Let me put the beast up here. The beast is the Greek word therion. Therion is neuter gender. I've had people say, I don't know what gender means. It either means male, masculine gender, female, feminine gender, or neuter gender, which neither male nor female. That'd be a table, a chair, your car. It has nothing to do with a human. So you got masculine, feminine, neuter gender. So the beast is a thing. And when you have a gender of a subject, anytime a pronoun is mentioned after that, his and him have to carry the same. The word his and him all through this says that the beast gave, that I saw, his feet was like the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his. Him and his have to carry the same gender as the beast. Well, the beast is not a him, it is a thing. It's a system. So the hims and the hises, A-U-T-O-U. Autu is the word. You got many variables of autu. You have A-U-T, Ada. An Ada on the end of a word, or an Ada nu, is always feminine gender. And that's what the Bible says. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself, it says, for it. The church is not an it, it's a her. It says aute, so it's her. Jesus died for his wife and nobody else. Autu can be either masculine or neuter gender, depending on the gender of the subject. And the subject is the beast, Totherion, neuter gender. That's just like Jim is the pastor Now, if I refer back to Jim, it's always got to be a masculine gender. If I said she, Jim is not a she. If I said it, Jim is not an it. I'd have to put he pastors the church. He preaches predestination. This has to match up with the gender of Jim. That is a bad translation. I don't care what translator did this. Half the translators were Roman Catholic of the King James Bible, and the chief translator was a man named Lancelot Andrews. He was a Roman Catholic priest that was up to be presented as Pope for Rome. I don't know who did it, but it was wrong. If you got the beast here, and you got the beast over here in Daniel 7, shouldn't they be the same gender? Yeah, sure they should. Let's look at Daniel 7, see if it's the same gender. Okay. Daniel 7. Go over to Daniel. A million things go through my mind when I'm teaching. I'm going to get back to what I was saying a while ago. All right. Daniel 7. Here's the beast. It says the same thing is rising up out of the sea, but the sea is the Mediterranean. All right. Daniel 7. I've spent my life studying prophecy in the 70 weeks of Daniel. If you just tuning in, you say, "Oh, you got that wrong." You hadn't heard what I've got to say yet. I haven't really hit it. I did 18 months on the 70 weeks of Daniel, one series. I didn't finish it. So all you're getting is an introduction here. All right. If the beast is a thing, and you have to have the mark of the beast to buy and sell, then you have to have the character of the beast. Because mark is the word charagma, and it means character. Now, let's look at this. Daniel 7. Does this sound like a thing, or does it sound like a hymn? You can't have God having the beast rise up out of the sea in Revelation 13 and have the beast rising up out of the sea in Daniel 7 and not be the same thing. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Belshazzar was a profligate. That means he was culturally a sleazebag is what he was. He was lascivious, debaucherous. He did everything that was wicked. Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, behold, the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea. They looked at the world. They said it had four sides. They knew nothing about America, knew nothing about, there was no America. There was no Alaska. It was there, but they didn't have it named. They said all they had was laid out like so. You know, in the Atlantic Ocean, they didn't know where it went to or where it ended. And they said it had four corners, and it had four winds, a north wind, a south wind, an east wind, a west wind. That's what they said. You got to study a lot to learn that. Now, and the four great beasts came up from the sea. diverse from one another. The first was like a lion, that's Babylon, and had eagle's wings. To have eagle's wings meant it moved swiftly. Nebuchadnezzar moved fast, conquering. And I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon the feet as a man. That's talking about when Nebuchadnezzar was struck down on his all fours in the 4th chapter of this same book, Daniel. And then after he was struck down, after 7 times, the reason he was struck down, he stood up over Babylon and said, "See great Babylon that I have built," Nebuchadnezzar. God said, "Just for that I'm going to strike you down, and you're going to eat grass with the cattle of the field. And you're going to, until 7 times. I believe it was 7 months, till your fingernails grow out like bird claws, till your hair grows out like eagle's feathers." Had to be 7 months. That couldn't happen in 7 days. And he couldn't have been 7 years eating grass with the field. Then he says, made to stand upon his feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it, and that's when Nebuchadnezzar stood up. But that's talking about Babylon. And behold, another beast, a second, like a bear. The bear is the largest carnivore in the world. 2 bears, the polar bear and the Kodiak from Kodiak Island. I've studied both of them. The Kodiak is a little taller, maybe when he stands up on his hind legs, raises his paw out, he may be 15 feet tall. The Kodiak is anywhere from 13 to 15 feet. Could be up to 17 feet, raising their paws up. That'd be something to contend with. The bear is the largest carnivore alive. Persia had the largest armies that ever existed. They would attack, it says the second beast was like a bear, and it raised up itself on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth. The 3 conquerings of the bear, or Persia, was Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. So to have in your mouth meant to conquer them. Then he says, between the teeth of it, and they said thus unto it, "Arise, devour much flesh, Persian bear." It's not Russian bear. It's a Persian bear. They would take 2.5 million men and attack one kingdom. They did that when they attacked Carthage. 2.5 million soldiers. Whoa, what an army. And after this, behold, lo, another like a leopard, which had upon its back of it 4 wings of a fowl. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. There were 4 generals that controlled, went before Alexander the Great. Alex the Great, let me see here. Alex Great had 4 men. Alex Great. Alexander the Great was, without a doubt, one of the most formidable men to go against. He had so many tricks up his sleeve. He studied constantly the enemy. But he had 4 generals. He had Cassander, Lysachamus, Lysachamus, I-M-U-S. Lysachamus, and he had Ptolemy, And he had, this is the four that it's talking about. And it doesn't mention them one time, it mentions them again in chapter 8. And Seleucus. Seleucus was the most greedy of all of them. He got the lion's share of Alexander the Great's empire when Alexander died. They believed that Alexander was only about 32 years old. He had been the king of Greece since he was approximately 20. And he was just an unbelievable. I had a guy that went to West Point said West Point teaches his tactics. Said he thought out of the box, as we put it. I'll tell the story about how when he was attacking the Persian army, he wanted to know how, or when the Persian army was attacking him, when the Persian chariots would come in, and they had those iron chariots, if this is a wheel, and they had those scythes going out the side of the wheels, that would cut men down. Nobody could fight an iron chariot. But Alexander the Great didn't study the chariots. He studied the horses. And he found out that if you open up a little place, have the men just back up like that, like a little inset, a little garage, that the horse would come in there and stop. And they'd kill the guy that's riding it and take his chariot and take it over there and implement it in their work. He was tricky. Nobody thought to study the horses, but he did. But anyway, Seleucus, he is the guy that got Syria. And Syria is constantly, Seleucus is constantly trying to raise up Syria to be an empire so it can attack Rome. He was a powerful guy. He was very ingenious. And he was always trying to attack Egypt down here. He wanted to come down and attack Egypt. But the thing is, he couldn't go out here in the Arabian desert. His highway was Israel to Egypt. Anyway, some of the generals under Seleucus was called Antiochus, Antiochus. You had several Antiochus. You had Antiochus the Great, Antiochus the God, and Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes was the one that had tried to attack Egypt. He came down, ran right through Israel. He's going to attack Egypt. Well, he had his army sitting right outside of Egypt, right outside their capital. And he got a message from Rome, from a general. And the general said, "Don't you attack Egypt till you talk to me." He said, "I want you to meet me on the island of Chittim, which is the same thing as Cyprus." He said, "I want you to meet me there." And there was nothing that Antiochus could do but do it. So he met this general there on Cyprus. And the general told him to stand right where he was, and he drew a circle around him in the dirt. And Rome was ruling the world at that time. That's why Rome, Babylon, and all these kings would call themselves kings of kings. That's where that comes from. It comes And actually, Jesus is the King of kings. He's the King of all the kings. But as long as the people would live according to Roman law and what their heads would say, they'd let you rule your own nation. And that's why Antiochus got out of hand. He was a solution king. And when he met that king there, he said, don't you get out of that circle until you promise you will not attack Egypt. Do you understand me, boy? And he said, gritting his teeth, just mad, infuriated. He said, okay. He was so mad, so angry, that he went back up to Jerusalem, defiled the temple. He's the very picture of the man of sin at the end of time. Man of sin. And he raised up an Ashtaroth, a tree goddess in the temple of God. And there's more to this story. I need to get on because I got so much to get to. And so he went back to home to do his business, and I've got more to say on that, but I won't right now. Now, so here's the beast. This has to be the same beast. It's the same lion, bear, and leopard, and a beast with iron teeth. So, and I beheld a leopard. You're saying, why a leopard? How can a leopard outdo a bear? Leopards are a killing machine. I've read up on them. They hunt at night. They hunt to eat. They hunt alone. And they're gonna get their enemy. A leopard can get a 150-pound man in his mouth, climb to the top of a tree with him. They would do that so they could keep him away from the other big cats. If a lion pursues you out there on the Serengeti, he may shake you and throw you down. If a bear gets you, he may do the same thing. If a leopard comes after you, he's coming to eat. He's going to kill you. That's how dangerous they are. So the leopard has 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And after this I saw in the night visions, behold, a 4th beast, the one that overthrows these. And the 4th beast is Rome. This is Babylon, Persia, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and then Rome. Rome is always represented in iron. You see in the 2nd chapter that image of Nebuchadnezzar, and it has a head of gold. Let me do this. This is Nebuchadnezzar's image. Has a head of gold. And Nebuchadnezzar has asked Daniel to interpret this, I can't draw, but it's...
Statue.
It's got a head of gold. It's got a chest of brass, of silver. And it's got a torso of brass. And it has legs of iron. And that's mixed with clay in the feet. They would have the head of gold. Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, thou art that head of gold, it's you, Babylon. Therefore, Persia, if you notice, as you go down this statue, the metals get less precious, but they get stronger. And Rome is able to overthrow everyone else. And it was Rome that subjugated these 4 generals of Alex the Great. Rome put them in submission. They never did get to rule after Alex the Great. But the image was a picture of the beast, and the idea of the clay. It says the clay was not mixed with iron. They had a treading trough when they were going to mold something into a vessel of some kind. They would take this treading trough and they would stamp the clay until they got all the bubbles out, all the impurities out. And when I was in elementary school in Fort Worth, Texas, about 1950 or something, I was in the 4th grade. And Mrs. Maggard, I think it was, or Haggard, was our teacher, our art teacher. She said, children, you got to beat that clay until you get all the bubbles out of it, because if you don't, when you put it into the kiln, it'll bust all to pieces. And that's what it wasn't mixed with the iron. This whole image was going to tread Israel down 70 times 7, 490 years, until Israel was purified. And at the end of the 70 weeks, does anybody know how long I've got back there? Mike?
39.
39? Okay. I can't go through everything I want to go through in the 70 week in the Daniel, but what really subjugated all the other beast world system was Rome, and she was always made of iron. In fact, when you see the scorpions, in Revelation 9, they're actually locusts coming out of the pit that are like scorpions. How are locusts like scorpions? Well, the reason I'm telling you this, because the scorpions had breastplates of iron. That means they come out of Babylon, or come out of Rome, and what ascended Rome and came out of Rome when the old Roman Empire was outlawed was the Roman Catholic Church. And that has to do with one of the heads being wounded unto death. Now, what was I going to tell you there? But the whole idea was all the time that Israel, the scorpions, in the Greek you have a noun, Scorpios, S-K-O-R-P-I-O-S, that's the noun scorpion. How are locusts like scorpions? There's a noun and a verb form of the noun. The verb form of Scorpios is scorpizo, S-K-O-R-P-I-Z-O. Scorpizo means to scatter. That's the same word in John 10, when John is talking about the shepherd of the sheep. He said when the shepherd leaves, he allows the assistant shepherd, the hireling, the one that's hired for money, the hireling, like Kenneth Copeland. And the hireling allows the wolf to come in. We know wolves are false teachers, according to Jesus and according to Paul. False teachers in Matthew 7 and in Acts 20. Paul, when he left the church at Ephesus, he said, wolves will come in, ravening wolves will come in, slaughter the flock, and will not spare the flock. Well, in John 10, the hireling, the man that works for money, like Kenneth Copeland or any Baptist preacher that works for money, he allows the wolf to come in and scatter. That word scatter is the verb form of scorpion. The reason I brought that out was to tell you that later on in that chapter 9 of Revelation, these scorpions have breastplates of iron. I got a book on arachnids. I bought that years ago. Arachnids are 8-legged creatures. That's what scorpions are. They got 8 legs. And the scorpions, with their 8 legs, there's several things about them that's amazing. They eat their own kind. They're carnivorous. They actually go out to hunt at night. They get in some can or something waiting for a victim to come along. And when it comes along, they sting it with a stinger. But they follow the stars at night. Isn't that amazing? Because Babylon followed the stars and the moon. And that's what scorpions do. But scorpizo, they had breastplates of iron. You find the iron in Revelation 13. Revelation 7. I'll get it in a minute. Revelation 9. You find the iron in Daniel. Daniel the 2nd chapter, Daniel the 7th chapter. And all of that represents Rome. Now, let me finish this and go back over to Revelation. I got to give you the mark of the beast. Now, go back over to Revelation, the 13th chapter. Revelation 13. I do a lot of referencing, and this is all in my head. I don't have it planned. I didn't plan anything when I got up here today. I've spent my life studying these things, and I don't mean it to boast. If you go through this stuff as much as I have, you'll understand. Now, and he says here, and the beast which I saw was like a lion. This is verse 2, was like a leopard, and his feet was the feet of a bear. Let me say it the way it is. And its mouth was the mouth of a lion, and the dragon, not a fire-breathing dragon, Dracon, means to fascinate. How in the world is Babylon going to lead people astray without making them feel good? It's not a fire-breathing dragon. That's a terrible translation, because I don't know what kind of creature you could use. You could say a smooth talker. They had to put it down. These translators did stuff that they wanted to do. I saw one of its heads, as it were, wounded to death. If you look up the word mount in McClintock and Strong, mount, it will tell you that a mountain and a head and a horn all meant power. It meant a leader, a head. And one of the heads, and a head was a capital city, so was a mountain. One of the capital cities wounded to death. There were 2 Caesars that rose up that forbid the fire worship in Rome. And what they did, they turned around And Constantine set up the same system in the Roman Catholic Church. I'll just put Catholic Church. And just simply renamed the images. He renamed Jupiter, Peter, and he renamed Aphrodite or Venus, Mary. Aphrodite has the same job as Mary, because Aphrodite means wrath, subduer. They said that Aphrodite could subdue the wrath of her son, so the Roman Catholics implemented Aphrodite in there, and they said that's why they prayed to Mary, so they could subdue the wrath of her son, Jesus. And that's really not true. All right. Now I want us to go over here further in this chapter. And I want us to look here at, gosh, where can I go here? Let me read down to it in verse. You've got two beasts here. You got a beast in the middle of this chapter, and he speaks for the other beast. And he says here in verse 11, I beheld another beast. The same thing applies to this beast that applies to the first beast. It's neuter gender. And when they put, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. He had two horns like a lamb. It looked like Christ. Looked like it represented Christ. And he spake as a dragon, one that fascinates. So this is something that looks like Christ, but it's actually something evil, because he speaks to fascinate, and God never does that. He exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, which is a world-ruling system, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men. Remember, fire from heaven means truth coming from the mouth of the prophets. So this is evidently a deceiving beast, and he's not bringing real fire down. And deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had. The word miracle is not a real miracle. It's Simeon, S-E-M-E-I-O-N. It's the word sign. So he produces something that looks like a sign. And he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the first beast, which had the wound by the sword and did live. And he had power. That word image is icon. It means something that's similar. And he had a power to give life unto the image of the beast. That's kind of like saying, boy, that new manager came in and gave life to that company. It doesn't mean the image will come alive. It means it will do things that seems to be progressive and getting ahead. That had the image of the beast, should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or their foreheads. The word mark is the word charagma. Now, from charagma, you get two other words, karox and character. Character would be character, our word character. Character. Karox means a stake. A stake marks a boundary. This is what the mark of the beast is. There was a tree in the middle of the garden that Adam was forbidden to partake of. Looks like a Christmas tree, that's what it is. There was a tree in the middle of the garden. You can't go over there and go beyond the stake of that boundary. You can't eat of that tree. You can eat of all these trees here in the garden, but you can't eat of that tree. You can eat of these trees. That's where we get the word iniquity. Iniquity is the word anomia in the Greek, A-N-O-M-I-A. It's a construction of nomos, which is the word law or lawful, and the alpha privative in front of it negates the word. It means unlawful. It was unlawful to go beyond this stake. And that's what Eve saw in the tree. A tree that was good for food, pleasant to the eye. It would make her wise. I believe this is the mark of the beast. I believe it's always been the same. John said, 1 John 2:16, all that's in the world is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, and the pride of life. Lust is the word epithumia. It means to long for that which is forbidden. This is forbidden there. It's unlawful to eat of that tree in the midst of the garden. It's unlawful to eat of the lust of the flesh. Lust means to long for that which is forbidden, and the good for food is pleasant to the eye, the lust of the eye. And when Eve looked at the tree, it was pleasant to her eye. The word idolatry, E-I-D-O-L-O-L-A-T-R-E-I-A, means to serve, latruo. What you see, E-I-D-O. It means to serve what you put in your eyes and your ears, and that goes all the way back to the garden that John said is everything in the world. And that word pride is the word alexonia, A-L-A-Z-O-N-I-A. That's the pride of life. It means self-esteem. I believe that's the mark of the beast. I believe the mark of the beast is wrapped up in these right here. I don't believe the mark changed from the Garden of Eden all the way through the book. Now, I want to continue reading this because I introduced you to something that he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark, a charagma, a stake, character. It can say etching, but a slave that belonged to someone had an etching put in his forehead or on his hand. And that showed who he belonged to. That's just like Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. And there was a name on her, the abominations of the earth. Let's read the next letter and I can explain that better. The next verse. No man might buy nor sell, save he that had the mark or that word or, name, mark or name, onoma. When you see or in a sentence, we're not talking about A-R-E, that's a verb. Let me tell you what this says in Webster's Dictionary. What it says that R means. R is a word, a functioning word to indicate an alternative. What this is saying is that name is an alternative to mark. So the mark of the beast is the name of the beast. In fact, it's the same thing as saying mark, i.e., name. When you see i.e. anywhere in a book, the word is id est. I-D-E-S-T. I-D-E-S-T. That's Latin. Id est means that is, or that is to say. So when it says mark or name, then the name of the beast, it's easier to study than the mark. That's just another word for mark. They have basically the same meaning. Let me show you something. If you've got Kittle's New Testament Dictionary of Greek Words, this is the section out of the Kittle's New Testament Dictionary of Greek Words. This has got 40 pages just on the name. And they'll tell you in here that it has the same basic meaning as mark. Let me read some things out of it. Do I have any time, Mike?
10.
10 minutes. Maybe I can go through here and show you some things. The word name in the Greek is onoma. O-N-O-M-A. And they will tell you that a man's name is not merely an appellation. Appellation is Jim. Your name is your reputation. It's what you do. That's what your name is. I'm going to have a big name in this town. Does that mean somebody's going to go down here to the Batman building and put your name 20 feet tall, Jim, across? No. That means you're going to have influence. You're going to have some authority. The Greek word for name is onoma. And the Hebrew word for name is Shem. To have a name means to have something of authority. Something. There's so much to read to you about name. It's just phenomenal. Shem was the second born son of Noah. And God blessed Shem and gave him the authority over Ham and Japheth. Ham was the youngest. For some reason, people think that Shem was the oldest because his name is always mentioned first. No, he wasn't the oldest. He was the second born. Now we're back to the second borns again. Let me go over here and show you in the 10th chapter of Genesis. And when you say Shem, you're saying one who's in authority. The word, when you look up Onoma, it'll say authority. Your name is your authority or your character. I suggest that everybody get the Kittle's New Testament Dictionary of Greek Words. I've had people say, well, that was written by a man who was a friend of Adolf Hitler. I don't know that they were friends. He was a German, Gerhard Kittel. But that's like saying, I'm not going to that maths class. That guy was a German in Germany when Hitler was in power. That's like saying, we're not going to use Werner von Braun, the head missile builder in Germany, because he was a Nazi. Werner von Braun was head of our space program. We wouldn't have been out there in space without him, and he was Hitler's top scientist. You can't say, I'm not going to go take that algebra class because that guy don't believe in predestination. If he knows algebra, take it from him. That's funny the way people react to these things. But Shem, look here, let me just show you real quick. Name and mark have basically the same meaning. It's the character. I mean, to get into the mark of the beast, I got to get into the character of the beast. I already had the character up here. All that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Isn't that the love of money? Love of money is the root of all evil. That's one word. Philargia, P-H-I-L-A-R-G-U-R-I-A, Philargia. That's the word love of money. It comes from philos and argery. Philos means a fondness for, and argery is the word silver or shining. A man who loves to shine and he wants all that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. That goes along with being famous, doesn't it? Famous. Remember, blessed are you when men shall reproach you. Reproach, O-N-E-I-D-I-Z-O. You're blessed when you are infamous. Not famous, infamous. If you're a famous singer, you got a lot of hit records, and everybody likes you. If everybody likes you, you're cursed from God. Boy, you're blessed. Woe unto you when all men speak well of you. If you're real popular and everybody likes you like they like Tom Brady, something wrong with your life. He's not going to take a stand for truth. I don't believe that. He is a Roman Catholic. He did get drunk the night of the Super Bowl and did some stupid, silly things. If you are famous like Frank Sinatra, woe unto you. If you're famous like Elvis, do I believe he's a Christian? No. He had all kinds of women all the time. Do I believe he was? I believe he was confused and lost. He didn't know what to do with himself. He gave cars away in order to have friends, but he didn't know who his friends were. He didn't know if they were there for his money or there because they were truly being a friend. if you're famous, if you're a big famous superstar, actor, country singer, pop singer, some of it's easy to say, warned you, Mick Jagger. That's easy to say. I warned you, David Lee Roth, that wacko that sang with Van Halen. But warned you, whoever you are, that if you're famous and you don't take a stand for the truth, the judgment of God is upon you. Well, he says here in Genesis that after they come out of the ark, in that 9th chapter, that Noah knew what his younger son had done, talking about Ham. That's his younger son. And he says he says, blessed be the Lord God of Shem. And then he says in verse 21 of chapter 10, unto Shem also the father of the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder. Japheth was the older, Ham was the younger, Shem was second born. And Shem has the same name. He has the same name as name. It's the exact same name and it's pronounced the same way. Do you know they don't even list him in the concordance? They just list name. So Shem was blessed. So to have a good name, the Bible says in the 2nd chapter of Revelation, I believe it's 17th verse, he's going to give us a new name when we're taken out here. I don't know if we're going to have a literal new name or what. Onoma, the Greek word, can mean notoriety. You can have a big bad name. I'm going to read some of these when I come back. Remember when the children of Israel said, Moses said, when I go tell Israel, I tell Pharaoh, let my people go. Israel's my son, even my firstborn. And they said, what if they say to him, what is his name? Or what if they say to you, the children of Israel? They haven't known of him for 400 years. And God said, you tell them, I am has sent me. Am is a form of the verb be. The being verbs of be is, am, are, was, were, being, been, have, has, had, do, does, did, shall, will, should, would, may, might, must, can, could. That's the being verbs. They're all a form of the verb to be. Will is a form of the verb to be. If you can will yourself into salvation, you can bring yourself into existence. Jehovah means self-existent. Am I out of time?
Yeah.
I'll tell you some things about names Saturday. It's just astounding what name means. Name is the same meaning as mark. It has to do with a man's authority. And if we have Christ's authority, where do we have it? In the mind. They called it the forehead, but that was in the mind. The Lord said, take my law, put it upon your hand, put it where you lie down, where your eyes are up, where you walk, and put it between your eyes, which means in the mind. That's the seal of God in us. The mark of the beast is in the mind. It's not this stupid thing that's going around. Oh, that's a vaccine. That's a mark of the beast. No, it's not. Ignorant. That's dumb to say that. Is the vaccine also a name? Yeah, it's a vaccine. Boy, the world is just. I believe the mark of the beast was there in the garden. He said, you can't partake of all that's in the world. That's the love of money. That's the love of self. By the way, We get the word argue from the word augury. Argue. From augury. I didn't even hardly get started on this. I've got it. I introduced you to mark equals name. Same thing. So when you see the name of the beast, you're seeing everything he represents. You're seeing his reputation. They will tell you in here that name is your reputation. How many Jim Browns are there? I used to travel. Went through Houston one time, opened up the big, thick directory, and they had 138 or 39 Jim Browns, just Jim Brown, in their phone directory. But none of them lived in Hendersonville. They didn't finally grow up to preach predestination and Christmas is pagan. That's my name, what I do. That's your name. And that's your mark. Well, let's pray. Father, thank you for truth. Sometimes I get on this subject and there's so much to say. I can't say it all. The people watching, Lord, strengthen those believers that are out there. Lord, let them know that we're with them. We may have to take off because of some sickness, but we'll be back. I pray that you'll give the believers strength to stand, to continue. Strengthen the members of this ministry and those that are struggling with problems. Help them, Lord. Fight every enemy we've got. We trust you to do that. There are people out there that would love to destroy this ministry. But Lord, you said if men touched your anointed, they'd have to suffer for it. Lead us to your elect family in Christ's name, amen. Man, I get on this subject of the beast and the mark of the beast, and it just overwhelms me. What you got there?
I just seen some papers here.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, it says no free will, God does all things. Grab one.
I'm just going to continue this Saturday. There's too much here. I can't get it all. I can't get it in one lesson, that's for sure.
So how's Mary doing?
She's doing pretty good. She wrestles with her blood pressure. It goes up and down. Sometimes it goes up out of sight, and then that afternoon it come way down. She just, I tell her, just don't worry about nothing. We have nothing to worry about. We don't have any bills. Of course, I'm 82 and she's 78, 79. So by the time you get that age, you shouldn't have any bills.
Yeah.
I've tried to get everything paid off over the years, and so we have no reason to worry.
Yeah.
She
Well,
worries over her lawnmower.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that teaching with the spiritual Sabbath, that's helped me out a lot.
That is,
Yeah, you know, resting in the sovereignty of
that
God.
is-
He's doing everything, and
if he's doing everything, why are we fretting over
yeah,
it?
if you want to
You know?
complain or argue, all you're doing is complaining about God, and that makes
We're
a lot of
fighting
sense
him.
to me. So
Well, he said when you do that, you're fighting my sovereign will. He said that in essence in Jude. You're fighting what he's ordained.
yeah,
If he wants your house to burn down, he'll burn it down. The best thing you can do if your house burns down, look for a rock to sit down on and try to find one under a tree.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, there's no doubt, and I think everybody goes through their own. So, and to me,
I mean,
looking back,
In another 10 years, I probably won't own my house. I'll probably be dead. I'll be fortunate to live to be 92. It's just,
part of life.
It's part of living. Getting old is part of living. When you get old, you don't feel about things like you used to. I don't.
Well, I'm definitely, I'm not all there, but I definitely look back, yeah.
Well, like you said, I believe that
a lot of
that Sabbath series has helped more people.
Oh, it's amazing. It really is. Yeah.
And-
I mean, to me, it's just something, it just makes a lot of sense.
Well, Paul said when he was in prison, I've learned to be content.
Yeah.
But that word content means to push self away. But he said I had to learn that. He didn't have that when he was young. When he argued with Barnabas, because Barnabas wanted to go get John Mark and take him on his second journey. He said, John Mark quit on me. I'm not taking him. And Paul was yelling at him, and Barnabas
That
had
could have
a...
been his thorn in the flesh too, his anger. It's possible. And the thing is that he asked God to take it away, and God said,
Well,
my grace.
What's so funny,
My grace is
he's the one that
sufficient.
told us to don't ask God. Paul's the one that said don't ask God over and over. And he
It's kind of
did.
ironic, isn't it?
That just
Yeah.
shows you how what Paul was. He was a human.
Yeah. Well,
I
it
believe
says,
when
I
he
mean,
got-
in the 7th verse, or the 7th chapter of Romans, I mean, the things I want to do, I do not do. I mean, it just shows you, he was struggling at that time, present.
Well, when he was in the 15th chapter, in the 15th chapter of Acts, he said, well, I'm ready to go on my next journey. And Barnabas said, let me go get John Mark. And Paul jumped all over Barnabas. I mean, he didn't deserve that. And I believe that's because Paul was young.
Yeah.
He was young. And he just hadn't learned to control his temper yet. Because later on in the 4th chapter of 2 Timothy, he tells Timothy, when you come before winter, bring my coat, and bring John Mark with you, because he's profitable to the faith now.
Yeah, it's amazing. Change.
It was changed because he was mature.
Exactly.
That's what it was about.
And of course, age, growing, and all the stuff he went through, he sees a whole, you see things